Welcome, new recruit of the Galactic Alliance. I'm your orientation officer from Tales from Outer Space, and it's my duty to prepare you for what might be the most challenging aspect of your service: interacting with humans. For those of you who haven't studied your galactic history, humans are simultaneously the architects of our alliance and the most unpredictable species within it. Fascinating creatures, really. They established the foundations of interplanetary diplomacy while still occasionally blowing up their own outposts because someone wanted to see what would happen. This orientation is, quite literally, a matter of survival. When a human utters certain phrases, your immediate response should be fear. Not mild concern, not cautious interest, fear. Today, we'll cover the 10 most dangerous things humans say, what they mean, and why your life may depend on recognizing them. Are you comfortable? Good. Though comfort isn't something you should get used to when humans are involved. Let's begin. Buffer 1. Hold my beer. 3 simple words that have preceded more catastrophes than antimatter reactor failures. When a human says, "Hold my beer," they are transferring responsibility for their beverage to you, while freeing their hands for what they perceive as a brilliant demonstration of skill, courage, or both. It is, invariably, neither. Consider the incident on Homeris 4. A human engineer named Maricus challenged a Zordanian engineer to what he called a friendly sparring match. The Zordanian, being 3 times the mass of Maricus and possessing chitinous armor, naturally declined out of concern for human fragility. Maricus then uttered the fateful words, "Hold my beer," handed his drink to a counselor, and proceeded to disable the Zordanian's exoskeleton with a small device he'd apparently built during lunch. The resulting diplomatic incident took 16 cycles to resolve. The counselor who held the beer was demoted. When you hear, "Hold my beer," prepare for the human to attempt something that defies both logic and survival instinct. They may try to ride a Category 6 storm vortex, just to see how far it goes. They might challenge a security drone to a wrestling match. One particularly memorable incident involved a human attempting to use a spear against a Nebulan tiger, because projectile weapons are for cowards. The proper response to "Hold my beer" is to refuse the beverage and evacuate to a safe distance. If evacuation is impossible, stand behind the human, as whatever catastrophe they're about to trigger will likely occur in front of them. 2. Don't worry about it. This phrase indicates that you should, in fact, worry intensely about whatever it is. Humans use this expression when they're about to engage in an activity that they know is dangerous, ill-advised, or explicitly forbidden by Galactic Alliance regulations. Ensign Trellix of the Diplomatic Corps once reported that a human ambassador told him not to worry about the strange humming coming from the quantum stabilizers. 6 hours later, the embassy was floating 16 meters above its original location because the human had tweaked the gravity generators to create what they called a better view of the sunset. When a human tells you not to worry, they are not offering reassurance. They are attempting to prevent you from interfering with whatever catastrophe they're orchestrating. The phrase is often accompanied by casual whistling, suspicious glances over the shoulder, or the human backing slowly toward a restricted access panel. The history of human exploration is littered with incidents preceded by "don't worry about it." The first contact with the Meridian Hive began with a human scientist uttering these words before releasing what they thought was probably just a worker drone into the embassy. It was, in fact, a queen, and the resulting colony took 3 years to relocate. When you hear a human say, "Don't worry about it," immediately check your emergency beacon, update your personal affairs, and prepare to file an incident report. 3. Would you like to see something cool? This question is not actually seeking your input. The human has already decided to show you something cool, regardless of your preference. More importantly, their definition of cool frequently overlaps with what other species categorize as terrifying, illegal, or potentially extinction level. Lieutenant Commander Vox of science vessel Empirica recorded a human researcher asking this question before revealing that they had been breeding miniature versions of Arcturus piranhas as pets. The fact that these creatures could eat through tritanium and reproduce asexually was apparently part of their charm. The phrase becomes particularly dangerous when uttered in laboratories, weapons development facilities, or anywhere near temporal manipulation equipment. One human physicist at the Galactic Academy asked an entire auditorium if they wanted to see something cool, then proceeded to demonstrate what happened when you reverse the polarity on a standard-issue railgun. The lecture hall required 6 months of reconstruction. When a human poses this question, the safest response is to say that you've just remembered an urgent appointment elsewhere. If escape is impossible, maintain at least 3 meters of distance and position yourself near an emergency exit. Dar 4. Seemed like a good idea at the time. This phrase is typically spoken after the fact, when the human is surveying the smoking ruins of whatever plan they just executed. It serves as both an explanation and an attempt at absolution for what was, in retrospect, obviously a terrible idea from inception. The Proxima Centauri outpost still references the good idea incident in their orientation materials. A human technician decided to recalibrate the station's thermal regulators during a solar storm because it seemed like a good idea at the time. The resulting temperature fluctuations caused all the synthetic plants in the biodome to simultaneously bloom and release their pollen, triggering allergic reactions in 73% of the station's personnel. The phrase reveals a peculiar aspect of human psychology, their ability to temporarily convince themselves that clearly dangerous actions are not only safe, but necessary. A human captain once explained that rerouting power from life support to the entertainment system seemed like a good idea because morale was low, and people can hold their breath for a really long time if they need to. When you hear this phrase, it's already too late for preventative measures. Focus instead on damage control, evacuation procedures, and documenting the incident for future training purposes. We're 5. This will just take a sec. A sec, short for second, is theoretically a brief unit of time in human measurement systems. However, when preceded by "this will just take," it becomes an almost meaninglessly elastic duration that could range from actual seconds to several galactic standard weeks. Commander Alex of Outpost 9 reported that a human engineer promised a routine maintenance check would just take a sec. 3 days later, the entire propulsion system had been disassembled across 4 decks, and the engineer was happily explaining that they'd discovered a more efficient configuration that would only require another sec to implement. The danger of this phrase lies in its false assurance of brevity. Humans genuinely believe they can accomplish complex tasks in impossibly short time frames. Whether this is optimism, self-deception, or a strange relationship with chronology remains a subject of debate among xenopsychologists. When a human tells you something will just take a sec, assume your schedule is now cleared for the remainder of the day, possibly the week. If the human is carrying tools, multiply your time estimate by a factor of 10. If they appear excited about the task, consider requesting leave time. Number 6. This is going to hurt. Unlike many human phrases, this one is refreshingly honest. When a human informs you that something is going to hurt, they are telling the absolute truth. The concern lies in what follows this admission. For humans, acknowledging pain often seems to grant them permission to proceed with whatever painful procedure they're contemplating. Ship's medical officer Janix documented a human doctor setting a crewmate's broken limb with the casual preface, "This is going to hurt, but it's better than the alternative." The alternative was apparently waiting for proper medical equipment, which the human deemed unnecessary. More alarmingly, humans sometimes use this phrase before voluntarily engaging in painful activities. Recreational practices like hot sauce challenges or polar plunges are preceded by this warning. Yet humans proceed anyway, suggesting either tremendous courage or questionable judgment. When a human tells you something is going to hurt, believe them implicitly. If they're performing necessary medical treatment, prepare accordingly. If they're suggesting a recreational activity that begins with this disclaimer, politely decline and suggest a game of chess instead. Darker 7, hear me out. This phrase indicates that the human is about to propose something so outlandish that they anticipate immediate rejection. The "hear me out" serves as a preemptive strike against your better judgment, asking you to suspend disbelief long enough for them to finish explaining a plan that likely violates several laws of physics, numerous alliance regulations, or both. Strategic Officer Kellix recorded a planning session in which a human began with "hear me out," before suggesting they disguise their diplomatic vessel as a meteor to slip past a blockade. When questioned about the logistics and legality of such a maneuver, the human responded with another dangerous phrase: "It works in movies." The danger escalates when multiple humans are present, as they tend to build upon each other's implausible suggestions with alarming enthusiasm. What begins as "hear me out, what if we rerouted power from the secondary systems?" can quickly evolve into a plan to create an artificial wormhole using kitchen appliances. When a human begins a sentence with "hear me out," prepare to listen politely, nod occasionally, and then suggest consulting the relevant regulations or experts before implementation. Under no circumstances should you say, "that might work," as this will be taken as unconditional endorsement. Narrated, "I've always wanted to try that." This seemingly innocent expression of curiosity often precedes humans engaging with unfamiliar and potentially dangerous technology, wildlife, or cultural practices without adequate preparation. The incident on Jupiter's moon Europa began with a human xenobiologist stating they'd always wanted to try communicating with the sub-ice organisms using sonic vibrations. The resulting disruption to the creature's mating patterns led to a temporary but alarming increase in their population, threatening the research station's structural integrity as the organisms attach themselves to the underwater portions of the facility. Humans possess an admirable spirit of exploration, but it's frequently unburdened by caution. Their desire to try things extends to experimental propulsion systems, unidentified alien artifacts, and cuisine that their digestive systems are demonstrably unable to process. When a human expresses that they've always wanted to try something, immediately assess whether that something is A. toxic, B. explosive, C. sacred to another culture, or D. explicitly forbidden by alliance protocols. If it meets any of these criteria, distraction is your best strategy. Suggesting a less dangerous alternative sometimes works, though be prepared for the human to want to try both. 9. What does this button do? If there exists a more terrifying combination of words in human language, we have yet to document it. This question reveals two alarming facts simultaneously. First, that the human has discovered a button, switch, or control. Second, that they are contemplating activating it without knowing its function. The infamous Big Red Button incident at Alliance headquarters resulted from exactly this question. A junior human diplomat, touring the Emergency Response Center, innocently asked about a prominently displayed red control panel before anyone could stop them. The resulting evacuation drill was particularly convincing because no one had actually scheduled it. Humans appear to have an irresistible attraction to unknown controls. Xenopsychologists theorize this may be an evolutionary trait from their development as tool users, or possibly a species-wide defect in impulse control. Whatever the cause, the consequences are invariably chaotic. When you hear a human ask about the function of a button, immediately place yourself between the human and the control in question. Provide a detailed, lengthy explanation of its purpose, importance, and the extensive training required to operate it properly. If possible, Mention that using it incorrectly would be embarrassing, as humans often respond better to potential social discomfort than to warnings of physical danger. 10. I wonder if it tastes like chicken. This phrase indicates that the human is contemplating consuming something that is not food, was never intended to be food, and may in fact be actively dangerous to ingest. Chicken is a reference to an earthbird whose flavor apparently serves as their universal comparison point. Science officer Melix documented a human researcher collecting samples of a previously undiscovered fungal growth on Epsilon 6, musing aloud about its chicken-like qualities moments before attempting to taste it. Only rapid medical intervention prevented serious neurological damage, as the fungus contained compounds similar to hallucinogenic substances on Earth. The human inclination to put unknown substances in their mouths has baffled xenobiologists for generations. Some speculate it was an early testing method before they developed more sophisticated analytical tools, a practice that has somehow persisted despite technological advancement. When a human wonders aloud about the flavor of a non-food item, immediate intervention is necessary. Remind them of available scanning technology. Point out the potential for toxicity, or, in extreme cases, create a diversion until the moment of curiosity passes. Those are the 10 phrases every Galactic Alliance recruit should recognize as danger signals when interacting with humans. However, I would be remiss in my duties if I didn't acknowledge that this list is woefully incomplete. Humans generate new, concerning phrases faster than we can document them. Other expressions to be wary of include, "Watch this." "It can't be that difficult." "I'm sure it's fine." "What's the worst that could happen?" And perhaps most ominously, "Trust me, I've done this before." Despite these warnings, I should note that humans remain valuable allies. Their unpredictability, while often terrifying, has repeatedly saved Alliance missions when conventional approaches failed. The same human who nearly detonates a station trying to improve the ventilation system might later save that station by improvising a solution no other species would consider. Congratulations on your assignment to work with humanity. Remember your training. Maintain a safe distance when necessary. And perhaps most importantly, develop a robust sense of humor. You'll need it. This concludes your orientation. Thank you to our patrons who support Tales from Outer Space, making these vital educational materials possible. May your interactions with humans be survivable, memorable, and, eventually, something you can laugh about. Just not when they're in earshot. They tend to take it as encouragement. Good luck, recruit. The orientation officer closed the holographic display and looked at the assembled group of new Alliance members. Their expressions ranged from horror to disbelief to what appeared to be excitement. That last reaction was concerning. "Any questions before we move on to basic human customs?" the officer asked. A tentacled Floridian raised an appendage. "Is it true that humans invented time travel by accident?" The officer sighed. "Yes. A researcher was attempting to create a more efficient coffee maker and somehow produced a device that sent her 3 weeks into the future. When she returned, her only comment was that she was disappointed the coffee still wasn't ready." A murmur ran through the room. "What about the rumor that humans intentionally consume neurotoxins for pleasure?" asked a crystalline Vesperian. "Also true," the officer confirmed. "They call it alcohol and caffeine, among others. They're quite proud of their ability to ingest substances that mildly poison them." The Vesperian's facets pulsed with alarm. A bipedal Martian tilted its head. "If humans are so dangerous, why are they allowed to interact with other species at all?" The orientation officer smiled wearily. "An excellent question. The truth is, for all their chaotic tendencies, humans possess remarkable creativity, adaptability, and persistence. They've solved problems that stumped the greatest minds of other species, often through what they call thinking outside the box, which usually means ignoring the existence of the box entirely. The officer activated another holographic display showing humans working alongside various alien species. The Alliance nearly collapsed during the quantum drift crisis of 2387. Conventional physics offered no solution to the expanding rifts in space-time. It was a human physicist who suggested we just try pushing the other way. A proposition so simplistic it was initially dismissed as mockery. 3 days later, that same approach, refined and implemented, saved 16 star systems. The display shifted to show a human standing triumphantly amid what appeared to be extensive wreckage. This is Admiral Cora Lee. During the Battle of Proxima Centauri, her ship was critically damaged. Life support was failing, and enemy vessels had surrounded her position. When asked about her strategy, she reportedly said, "Don't worry about it," reconfigured her damaged warp drive to create a resonance cascade, and disabled the entire enemy fleet while somehow preserving her own crew. The officer deactivated the display. The point is, while you should absolutely fear certain human phrases, you should also recognize that the same unpredictability that makes them dangerous also makes them invaluable. Just maintain safe distances when they start getting creative. A nervous Pleiadian recruit raised a hand. What's the protocol if a human says they have a gut feeling about something? The orientation officer's expression became grave. Listen to them immediately. Human gut feelings have inexplicably predicted solar flares, diplomatic betrayals, and structural failures that our most advanced sensors missed. We don't understand it, but we've learned to respect it. Now, the officer continued, let's move on to human social customs, starting with why you should never, under any circumstances, ask about their reproductive practices unless you have at least 3 hours to spare and a strong tolerance for what they call oversharing. The recruits leaned forward, simultaneously horrified and fascinated, just like everyone else who encountered humans for the first time. 3 months later, the orientation officer received a message from one of the recruits who had attended the session. It contained only a brief report and an image of the recruit standing next to a grinning human amid what appeared to be the wreckage of a small transport vessel. The report read, "Encountered first human phrase from the orientation list today. Human engineer said, 'Hold my coffee,' before attempting to reroute power during an ion storm. Against all probability and several laws of physics, it worked. Ship saved. Though the galley may never be the same. I remembered your advice and stayed behind them. Thank you for the training." The orientation officer smiled and filed the report under successful first contact. Another recruit who would live to be terrified another day. As the officer prepared for the next orientation session, a notification appeared. A human delegation had requested to review the training materials, just out of curiosity. The orientation officer sent a polite reply explaining that the materials were still being updated and, unfortunately, weren't ready for review. Experience had taught that letting humans know exactly what behaviors others found alarming only inspired them to invent new ones. Some mysteries were better preserved. Besides, the next scheduled training needed to include a newly documented human phrase that had preceded 3 separate diplomatic incidents in the past month. "Hey, I just had the best idea." The Galactic Alliance Security Council convened for its quarterly review of incident reports. The chief security officer, a stern Andromedan with 17 years of experience, looked distinctly uncomfortable. "The human contingent has requested modifications to our emergency protocols," the officer began. The council members exchanged glances. "What sort of modifications?" asked the Arcturian representative. "They believe our warning systems are, to quote, too boring to be effective. They've suggested that emergency alerts should be, and again I quote, more exciting so people actually pay attention." "Define exciting," the Venusian counselor said cautiously. The security officer's skin shifted to a pale blue, the Andromedan equivalent of a wince. They've proposed replacing standard emergency tones with what they call sick beats, and having evacuation instructions delivered by something called a hype man. Silence fell over the chamber. "Have they demonstrated this concept?" the Pleiadian representative finally asked. "Yes. During the demonstration, evacuation efficiency improved by 26% among all species. Even the Valerians moved quickly, and they typically ignore emergency drills entirely." More uneasy glances were exchanged. "So it works," the Martian counselor concluded. "It works," the security officer confirmed reluctantly. "Though I feel compelled to note that 3 Rigelian delegates were so alarmed by the sudden change in protocol that they secreted defensive mucus, which caused a secondary slip-and-fall incident." The council chambers remained quiet for a long moment. "I move that we approve the human modifications on a trial basis," the Venusian counselor finally said, "with the stipulation that they provide advance notice before demonstrations." "Seconded," the Arcturian representative added. "And may the record show that I predicted at last year's meeting that humans would eventually redesign our emergency systems to be, as they say, more fun." "The prediction is noted," the chief council member acknowledged. "Let us vote." The measure passed unanimously, though several council members appeared to vote in favor simply out of morbid curiosity about what humans would come up with next. As the meeting adjourned, the chief security officer was approached by the human liaison, a cheerful woman named Captain Morgan. "Great news," she said. "While you were voting, I had some thoughts about the diplomatic meeting protocols. Have you ever considered starting important negotiations with an icebreaker game?" The security officer's skin turned a deep, alarmed purple. "Hear me out," Captain Morgan continued, unaware or unconcerned about the Andromedan's chromatic distress signal. "Trust falls between species with dramatically different anatomies. Think about how much cultural understanding we could build." The security officer made a mental note to update the orientation materials with a new warning phrase. "I had some thoughts." Dr. Eliza Chen sat in the observation lounge of the Alliance flagship Harmonious Accord, watching Earth grow larger in the view screen as the ship approached her homeworld. As the only human in the medical department, she'd grown accustomed to being something of a curiosity to her colleagues. A Taurian medical officer settled into the seat beside her, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of friendly greeting. "Dr. Chen," he said, "I've been meaning to ask you something about human medical practices." "Go ahead," she replied, already anticipating where this might go. These conversations usually ended with her alien colleagues somewhere between horrified and fascinated. "Is it true that humans performed surgery on themselves before developing anesthesia?" She nodded. "Unfortunately, yes. Medical history on Earth is pretty grim by modern standards. And even in your modern era, humans voluntarily have their bodies decorated with needles and pigments." "Tattoos? Yes, they're quite common. I have one myself." She rolled up her sleeve to reveal an intricate DNA helix winding around her forearm. The Taurian's breathing appendages fluttered in what she recognized as distress. "You endured needles penetrating your dermis thousands of times, for aesthetic purposes." Dr. Chen shrugged. "It only hurt for a little while, and I like how it looks. Humans are pretty good at enduring temporary discomfort for long-term benefits. Like your consumption of capsaicin compounds that trigger pain receptors. Spicy food, yes. It's delicious once you get used to it." The Taurian was silent for a moment, his secondary eyes closing in contemplation. "I attended the orientation about dangerous human phrases last week." "Oh?" Dr. Chen raised an eyebrow. "What did they warn you about this time?" "They suggested extreme caution when a human says, 'It's probably fine,' or 'How hard could it be?'" She laughed. "That's fair advice, actually." The orientation officer also mentioned something I've been curious about. "Is it true that humans sometimes leap from perfectly functional aerial vehicles with only fabric devices to slow their descent? For entertainment?" "Skydiving? Sure, it's exhilarating. The Taurian's skin paled. "You've done this 3 times. I'd do it again if I had the chance." "May I ask, why?" Dr. Chen looked out at the approaching Earth, considering how to explain something that felt so intrinsically human. "There's something about confronting fear directly," she finally said. "When you voluntarily put yourself in a situation that triggers your survival instincts, but you know you've prepared properly. It's like having a conversation with the most primitive part of your brain. Your body is screaming that you're in danger, but your mind knows you're actually safe." The Taurian's appendages twitched with what might have been horror or fascination. "And this is enjoyable?" "Immensely. It's hard to explain, but there's clarity in those moments. Everything non-essential falls away." The medical officer was quiet for a long moment. "The orientation did not adequately prepare me for conversations with humans." Dr. Chen smiled. "If it helps, most humans find other humans confusing too. We're not exactly a homogeneous group." "Indeed," the Taurian agreed. "Though there is one consistency I've observed. Last week, when our power systems malfunctioned, 3 different human engineers responded with the phrase, 'I can fix that,' despite having no specialized training in Taurian technology." "And did they fix it?" "Yes," the Taurian admitted, sounding slightly bewildered. "Using methods that violated several operational protocols and what appeared to be a food preparation utensil." Dr. Chen nodded. "That sounds about right. The orientation should probably include 'I can fix that' on their warning list. It's usually either the beginning of a solution or the beginning of a much bigger problem." The ship's announcement system chimed softly. "Preparing for Earth orbital insertion. All personnel please secure stations." "I should return to medical," the Taurian said, rising. "Thank you for the cultural insights, Dr. Chen." "Any time," she replied. "And if you're still curious about human behavior, the Diplomatic Corps is hosting a karaoke night next week." "Karaoke?" "It's when humans deliberately sing poorly in front of others for entertainment." The Taurian's breathing appendages fluttered again. "I believe I will observe this from a safe distance." "Wise choice," Dr. Chen agreed, turning back to watch her home planet fill the view screen. Sometimes, she wondered if the Alliance's fascination with human unpredictability said more about the rigid structures of other species than it did about humanity's supposed recklessness. After all, humans hadn't built an interstellar civilization by being entirely irrational. They just learned early that sometimes the best way through an impossible situation was to try something that, by all reasonable measures, shouldn't work at all. Speaking of which, she had a proposal to submit about incorporating Earth emergency medical techniques for species with compatible biologies. The Alliance medical protocols were impressively thorough, but lacked the improvisation that had saved countless lives in Earth's disaster zones. She could already imagine the reactions when she prefaced her presentation with, "This might sound crazy, but hear me out." The Galactic Alliance Annual Technology Expo was in full swing, with representatives from thousands of worlds displaying their latest innovations. The human section was cordoned off with additional safety barriers, a precaution implemented after last year's incident involving what the humans had called a slightly enhanced coffee maker that somehow achieved sentience and attempted to unionize the cleaning drones. Ambassador Terrell, the senior human diplomat, guided a group of Alliance officials through the exhibit with practiced ease. "And here we have the latest developments in Earth's quantum entanglement communication systems," he explained, gesturing to a deceptively simple-looking device. "It allows instantaneous communication across any distance without detection or interception." The Syrian Minister of Technology inspected the device with all 3 of her sensory appendages. "Impressive. Our scientists have been working on similar technology for decades, with limited success. How did your team overcome the coherence degradation issue?" Ambassador Terrell cleared his throat. "Well, according to the lead researcher, and I quote directly from her report, We kept having this problem with quantum states collapsing, so I just decided to try working backward from the end state instead of forward from the beginning. And it turns out that totally works. The assembled officials stared at him. That's it? The Centaurian science director asked. That was the breakthrough? Apparently, Terrell said with a slight shrug. Dr. Patel has described her methodology as quantum reverse engineering, though she admits the term is somewhat imprecise. The officials exchanged glances that Terrell had come to recognize as the universal nonverbal signal for humans are doing it again. Moving on, he continued smoothly. Here we have a prototype bioregeneration chamber that can regrow complex tissue structures, including entire limbs. The officials crowded around the cylindrical device, which hummed softly and emitted a gentle blue light. The bioethical implications alone are staggering, the Pleiadian health minister observed. The research trails must have been extensive. Terrell maintained his diplomatic smile. The technology was actually developed by a graduate student who, according to her thesis advisor, was supposed to be working on something entirely different, but got distracted by an interesting problem. The Arcturian representative's sensory crest flattened against his skull. Are you suggesting this revolutionary medical technology was created accidentally? Not accidentally, Terrell corrected. Just tangentially to the assigned research. Ms. Okafor was working on agricultural applications for rapid plant growth when she realized the same principles could be applied to vertebrate tissue regeneration. And her institution allowed this deviation, the Procyon education liaison asked. Well, by the time her advisor realized what she was doing, she'd already regrown a laboratory rat's tail, so it seemed counterproductive to redirect her efforts. The tour continued in this vein, with each revolutionary human technology accompanied by an origin story that left the Alliance officials increasingly bewildered. Artificial gravity manipulators inspired by a childhood toy. Radiation shielding developed because someone was tired of having to wear bulky suits all the time. Neural interface technology that began as an attempt to create more realistic video games. As they reached the end of the human exhibition, the Syrian minister lingered behind with Ambassador Terrell. Ambassador, she said quietly, I've observed 17 major technological demonstrations today, and not one seemed to follow what I would consider a logical research progression. Terrell nodded. That's fairly typical. Minister, human innovation tends to be nonlinear. That's one way to describe it, she replied. Another might be chaotic to the point of incomprehensibility. How does your species manage to advance at all without structured research protocols? The ambassador considered his response carefully. We do have structured protocols, he said. They're just flexible. Humans have found that too much rigidity can stifle the creative connections that lead to breakthroughs. The Syrian's appendages waved in what might have been skepticism. And yet, your species has developed technologies that rival or exceed those of civilizations thousands of years older than your own. We're motivated learners, Terrell said with a smile. Indeed. The minister hesitated, then added, There's been discussion in the council about implementing some human methodologies in Alliance research divisions. Oh, Terrell kept his expression neutral, though this was exactly the kind of diplomatic progress he'd been working toward. Yes, though there is concern about the safety implications. The phrase acceptable casualty rate appeared frequently in the discussions. The ambassador winced slightly. I understand the concern, but I can assure you that modern human research facilities have extensive safety protocols, which your researchers regularly ignore, the minister pointed out. Not ignore, Terrell corrected. Reinterpret in context. The Syrian made a sound that the ambassador's translator didn't catch, but he suspected it was the equivalent of a sigh. The council is prepared to approve a pilot program, she said finally. A joint research initiative with selected human scientists working alongside Alliance researchers. on a station with enhanced emergency response capabilities. Terrell beamed. That's excellent news, Minister. I'll begin compiling a list of candidates immediately. With one condition, she added. No human on the research team may, at any point, utter the phrase, "I wonder what would happen if—" The ambassador's smile faltered slightly. That might be challenging to enforce. Nevertheless, it is a non-negotiable stipulation. I understand, Terrell said. I'll make sure all human participants are thoroughly briefed on prohibited phraseology. As the Syrian minister rejoined her delegation, Ambassador Terrell made a mental note to warn the research candidates about the verbal restrictions, though he suspected that human ingenuity would simply develop new phrases to precede their experimental impulses. After all, "Let's run a brief test" could sound perfectly reasonable to alien ears, while still introducing radical variables into a supposedly controlled experiment. Diplomacy, like science, sometimes required creative reinterpretation of established parameters. The alarm blared through the corridors of Deep Space Research Station Epsilon, its pulsing red lights casting eerie shadows as personnel from a dozen different species hurried toward their emergency stations. In the central control room, Station Director Velian, a tall, slender Andromedan with silver-flecked skin, loomed over the main console. "Status report," he demanded. All four of his eyes focused on the holographic display showing cascading failure indicators throughout the station's western quadrant. Lieutenant Zara, a human officer with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, didn't look up from her console as her fingers flew across the controls. Containment field in Lab 7 is down to 32% integrity and falling. Automated systems are failing to compensate for the quantum fluctuations. Evacuation status. Western quadrant is clear except for... Zara paused, her expression hardening. Sir, Dr. Henriksen is still in Lab 7. Director Velian's skin rippled with chromatic distress. Of course he is. Open a communication channel. The main screen flickered to life, showing a disheveled human male in his 50s, working frantically amid equipment that appeared to be simultaneously melting and crystallizing. Dr. Henriksen, the director said with remarkable calm, you were ordered to evacuate 7 minutes ago. The scientist barely glanced at the camera. Just need another minute. I've almost got it stabilized. Zara muted the channel momentarily. Sir, containment is at 27% and falling. If those quantum particles escape confinement... I'm aware of the implications, Lieutenant. Velian interrupted. Prepare for emergency protocols. He unmuted the channel. Doctor, I am giving you 30 seconds to evacuate before I initiate emergency separation procedures. This finally got Henriksen's full attention. You can't jettison this lab. I'm on the verge of a breakthrough in temporal stability. Just give me 2 minutes. Containment at 23%, Zara reported quietly. Velian's lower eyes narrowed. Dr. Henriksen, may I remind you that your breakthrough was supposed to be a routine calibration of the quantum particulator. The experiment you're currently conducting was explicitly rejected by the Safety Committee last month. The human had the grace to look slightly abashed. I may have made some modifications to the approved procedure. Containment at 19%, Zara updated. 20 seconds, Doctor, Velian stated firmly. Henriksen turned back to his equipment, movements becoming even more frantic. Look, I can fix this. The problem isn't with the containment field. It's with the temporal alignment. If I reverse the polarity on the main emitter and reroute power from the auxiliary systems... 10 seconds. The human scientist didn't respond, fully absorbed in his work. His hands moved with surprising precision for someone facing imminent danger, making adjustments to equipment that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Containment at 15%, Zara reported. Sir, we need to initiate separation now. Director Velian raised a hand, his eyes fixed on the screen. Something in the human's confident movements gave him pause. Dr. Henriksen, what exactly are you attempting? Most temporal stabilization approaches try to force particles back into normal spacetime, Henriksen explained, without looking up, his words rushing together. But what if instead we embrace the multiplicity? Create a controlled pocket where quantum uncertainty is the norm, but contained within predictable parameters. That's theoretically impossible, Velian stated. Only because no one's done it yet, the human replied with a grin that the director had come to recognize as particularly dangerous. And there! With a final adjustment, the equipment stopped its alarming phase shifting. The warning indicators throughout the lab began to shift from red to yellow. Containment stabilizing at 17%, Zara reported, sounding surprised. No, wait, 22%, 31%. It's working! Henriksen exclaimed, backing away from the now stable equipment. The quantum particles are maintaining multiplicity, but within the new containment parameters. Containment at 54% and rising, Zara confirmed. Whatever he did, it's actually working. Director Velian's skin slowly returned to its normal blue hue. Dr. Henriksen, please report to my office immediately. While I appreciate your ingenuity, we will be discussing proper experimental protocols at length. Of course. Director, the scientist agreed, though his attention was already back on his readings. Just let me document these results first. This could revolutionize our understanding of temporal physics. As the emergency alert silenced throughout the station, Lieutenant Zara looked up at her commander. Sir, should I still prepare separation procedures, just in case? No, Lieutenant, but maintain enhanced monitoring on Lab 7. Velian's lower eyes closed in what might have been resignation. And update the orientation materials for new personnel. Add "I can fix this" to the list of concerning human phrases. In the Alliance Academy for Interspecies Diplomacy, a classroom of cadets from across the galaxy listened attentively as Professor Telex, a seasoned Rigelian diplomat, concluded his lecture on human diplomatic practices. And so, the professor summarized, when engaging with human representatives, it is essential to recognize that their communication style often involves what they call small talk before addressing substantive matters. This is not, as some species interpret it, an attempt to delay proceedings or gather intelligence. Rather, it is a cultural ritual establishing social connection. A Centaurian cadet raised a tentacle. Professor, is it true that humans sometimes use intentional linguistic ambiguity in diplomatic settings? An excellent question, Telex replied. Humans employ various forms of indirect communication, including understatement, irony, and sometimes deliberately vague language. For example, if a human diplomat describes a proposal as interesting, they may actually find it problematic, but are offering you an opportunity to revise before formal rejection. The classroom murmured with notes being taken. A Venusian cadet with iridescent scales spoke next. How do we interpret human nonverbal cues? Their facial expressions seem excessively mobile and potentially contradictory. The professor activated a holographic display showing various human facial expressions. Human faces can indeed convey complex and sometimes contradictory emotions simultaneously. This chart shows basic expressions, though individual variations exist. Pay particular attention to the eyes and mouth, which are primary indicators. He highlighted a specific image of a smiling human. Note this expression. Humans call this a polite smile, or sometimes a diplomatic smile. The mouth forms the shape associated with positive emotion, but observe the eyes. They show no corresponding engagement. This typically indicates tolerance rather than genuine pleasure. A Martian cadet in the front row raised a hand. Professor, last week in practical exercises, my human counterpart suggested we think outside the box regarding a territorial dispute. The translator functioned correctly, but I failed to understand the reference to a container. Several cadets nodded in agreement, having encountered similar confusion. Ah, yes, Professor Telek said. Human language is rich with what they call idioms, phrases with meanings not deducible from their literal components. Thinking outside the box refers to considering solutions beyond conventional parameters. Your confusion is understandable. Even the most sophisticated translation systems struggle with idiomatic expressions. The professor cycled through several slides showing common human idioms. Breaking the ice, hitting the nail on the head, beating around the bush. None of these involve actual ice, nails, or vegetation, yet they appear frequently in diplomatic discourse. A Pleiadian cadet with crystalline features spoke hesitantly. Professor, during Interaction Lab, a human diplomat said we should take their proposal with a grain of salt. I was concerned this indicated a required ritual involving earth minerals. Gentle laughter rippled through the classroom. A reasonable misinterpretation, Telek assured the cadet. This particular idiom suggests examining information with skepticism. No sodium chloride is involved in the process. As the professor prepared to continue, his communication device chimed. He checked it briefly, his expression changing to one that his students had come to recognize as diplomatic concern. It appears we have an opportunity for a practical lesson, he announced. The human delegation has requested an immediate amendment to today's treaty signing ceremony. The cadets straightened attentively. They have asked that the ceremony include what they call a photo opportunity, wherein representatives will shake appendages while exchange devices record the interaction. They consider this an essential component of the process. A Taurian cadet's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. But the treaty text was finalized 3 cycles ago. Why add ceremonial elements now? This is a perfect example of human diplomatic flexibility, Professor Telek explained. To humans, the symbolic and documentary aspects of diplomacy carry significant cultural weight. The image of agreement is, to them, almost as important as the agreement itself. Is this a form of human deception? Asked an Arcturian cadet. Not at all, the professor clarified. Rather, it represents a holistic approach to diplomatic processes. For humans, agreements exist not only as legal documents, but as social and cultural events. Their history contains numerous examples of treaties that failed, not because of their content, but because they lacked social legitimacy or public support. The professor closed his presentation. For your next assignment, analyze the ceremonial components of 3 major human diplomatic events and identify how these elements contributed to the public reception of the agreements. Consider especially the human concept of optics in international relations. As the cadets filed out, Professor Telek noticed a human diplomatic attaché waiting by the door. She approached once the room had cleared. Professor, I hope I'm not interrupting, she said with a smile that his trained eye recognized as genuine. I was hoping to discuss the upcoming cultural exchange program. Not at all. Attaché Rodriguez. I was just finishing a lecture on human diplomatic practices. Her smile widened. Any warnings about our strange habits? Merely observations on cross-cultural communication challenges, he replied diplomatically. Let me guess, idioms, small talk, and our obsession with photo ops? The professor's skin shifted to a shade indicating mild embarrassment. Your assessment is accurate. Don't worry about it, she said casually. We know we're the weird ones in the room. My supervisor spent 20 minutes yesterday explaining to the Andromedan delegation why we need to sleep on their proposal. Poor things thought we were suggesting some kind of required hibernation period. Professor Telek permitted himself a small gesture of amusement. The endless fascinating challenges of interspecies diplomacy. Speaking of challenges, Rodriguez continued. About that cultural exchange. We were thinking it might be good to shake things up a bit. Maybe something less formal, more interactive. The professor felt a familiar sense of caution at the phrase, shake things up, now listed in the Academy's official glossary of concerning human expressions. "What sort of interaction did you have in mind?" he asked carefully. "Nothing too wild," she assured him, then paused. "Well, actually, that depends on your definition of wild. How do you feel about karaoke?" As Rodriguez enthusiastically explained the concept of public recreational singing, Professor Telix made a mental note to update his lecture materials. Perhaps an entire section on the human tendency to introduce unpredictability into even the most carefully structured diplomatic proceedings might be in order. Though he had to admit, after nearly 30 years in interspecies diplomacy, the humans certainly kept things interesting. The first-year medical students at the Galactic Alliance Medical Academy filed into the lecture hall, their diverse anatomies settling into adaptable seating designed to accommodate everything from Rigelian hoverforms to Taurian quadrupeds. At the front of the hall stood a human woman in her 50s, her silver-streaked hair pulled back from a face lined with experience. The projected name beside her read, Dr. Isabella Okafor, Emergency Medicine Specialist, Earth. "Welcome to Xenophysiology 101, she began, without preamble. "I'm Dr. Okafor, and for the next term, I'll be introducing you to the fascinating, often bewildering diversity of physiological systems you'll encounter as Alliance medical practitioners." She activated a holographic display showing a rotating image of what appeared to be a human circulatory system. "We'll begin with a familiar example. Human cardiovascular physiology. Not because humans are particularly special, but because they represent an interesting middle ground between efficiency and redundancy." A Centaurian student raised an appendage. "Doctor, I've heard that humans can survive significant blood loss. Is this accurate?" "An excellent question," Dr. Okafor replied. "Humans can indeed lose up to 30% of their blood volume and recover without permanent damage, given proper treatment. Our cardiovascular system compensates through various mechanisms, including vasoconstriction and increased heart rate." She switched the display to show comparative blood loss tolerance across species. "As you can see, this places humans roughly in the middle of the Alliance spectrum, more resilient than Pleiadians, but significantly less so than Arcturians, who can function with just 40% of their blood volume." A crystalline Vesperian student chimed in. "Is it true that humans intentionally donate blood to each other? My cultural studies professor mentioned this practice." Dr. Okafor nodded. "Yes, blood donation is a common medical practice on Earth. Compatible blood types can be transferred between individuals, allowing us to treat blood loss injuries more effectively." "Fascinating," the Vesperian responded, their facets shimmering with interest. "On my world, fluid exchange between individuals is exclusively reproductive. Cultural and biological diversity is precisely why you're all here," Dr. Okafor said with a smile. "What seems ordinary to one species may be extraordinary to another." She switched the display again, this time showing the human nervous system. "Moving on to neurology, humans possess a centralized nervous system with relatively limited regenerative capabilities, unlike Floridians, who can regrow neural tissue, or Martians, who distribute cognitive functions throughout their bodies. Human cognition is primarily localized in the brain." A Taurian student with 4 eyes blinked thoughtfully. "Yet humans have developed neural interface technology that exceeds most other species. This seems counterintuitive, given their limited natural neural plasticity." "An astute observation," Dr. Okafor acknowledged. "This is actually a pattern you'll notice throughout human medical history. Our biological limitations often drive our technological innovations. Because we cannot naturally regenerate neural tissue, we've invested heavily in both preventative protection and artificial interfaces." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "In fact, many of our most significant medical advances came from working around our limitations, rather than building on our strengths." The doctor switched to a historical timeline of human medical developments. Before joining the Alliance, Humans had already developed artificial limbs with sensory feedback, laboratory-grown replacement organs, and the beginnings of neural regeneration therapy, all because our natural healing abilities were insufficient for our activities. A Pleiadian student with luminescent skin raised a hand. Doctor, is it accurate that humans continued space exploration before solving radiation protection issues? Our historical texts suggest your species accepted significant health risks during early space development. Dr. Okafor's expression became more serious. That's correct. Human history includes numerous examples of proceeding with exploration or research despite known health risks. Our early astronauts experienced increased cancer rates and bone density loss. Yet we continued sending humans to space while simultaneously working to mitigate these effects. She switched the display to show early human space missions. This willingness to accept calculated medical risks is both a strength and a concern in alliance medicine. Human medical practitioners often demonstrate greater comfort with provisional or partial solutions than many other species. Is this why the Medical Ethics Board requires additional certification for human doctors? Asked an Andromedan student. Partially, Dr. Okafor admitted. The certification ensures that human medical practitioners understand the varying risk tolerances across alliance species. What might be considered a reasonable risk on Earth could be culturally or physiologically unacceptable for other species. She switched back to the comparative physiology display. For your first assignment, you'll analyze the emergency medical protocols for 3 different alliance species, identifying how these protocols reflect both biological necessities and cultural values around healthcare. As the lecture continued, Dr. Okafor guided the students through the complex interplay of biology, technology, and culture that shaped medical practice across the Alliance. She emphasized that understanding these interconnections was just as important as memorizing anatomical structures or biochemical pathways. Medicine is not merely about keeping organisms functioning, she concluded. It's about helping individuals thrive according to their own biological and cultural parameters. Sometimes that means fixing what's broken. Other times, it means finding creative ways to work with limitations that cannot be overcome. As the students filed out after the lecture, Dr. Okafor noticed a young human medical student lingering behind. "Did you have a question?" she asked. "Sort of," the student replied. "I noticed you didn't mention human medical innovations since joining the Alliance. There have been some pretty revolutionary developments in the past decade." Dr. Okafor smiled. "I'm saving those for next week's lecture on cross-species medical collaboration, but I'm curious. Which development do you find most significant?" "Probably the adaptive immunotherapy techniques based on Floridian regenerative principles," the student answered promptly. "Though the neural interface improvements using Vesperian crystalline structures are pretty amazing too." "Both excellent examples," Dr. Okafor agreed. "And both perfect illustrations of why the Alliance Medical Corps needs practitioners from all species. Human medical innovation has accelerated tremendously through collaboration." The student nodded. "I heard the Rigelian Medical Council initially opposed human experimental methodologies as unnecessarily iterative and risk-tolerant." "They did," Dr. Okafor confirmed with a slight smile. "Until a human Vesperian team developed a treatment for Rigelian neural degradation that their own researchers had deemed theoretically impossible." "Because the human researchers didn't know it was supposed to be impossible?" "Precisely. Sometimes, not knowing the established limitations is its own form of expertise." She gathered her materials. "That's your unofficial lesson for today. In medicine, as in many fields, knowledge of what's possible can sometimes limit what you attempt." Captain Alara Voss stood on the bridge of the Alliance exploration vessel, Horizon Seeker, watching the swirling anomaly on the main view screen with a mixture of scientific curiosity and tactical concern. The phenomenon, a vortex of energy in deep space, pulsed with colors that shouldn't exist in normal spacetime. Analysis, Science Officer, she requested. Lieutenant Commander Naveen Shah, the ship's human science officer, looked up from his console. It appears to be a naturally occurring quantum fissure, Captain, similar to the artificial ones we can generate for FTL travel, but significantly larger and more stable. Energy readings suggest it's been here for, well, possibly thousands of years. Threat assessment? Minimal, as long as we maintain our distance, Shah replied. Though I recommend adjusting our shields to compensate for the quantum fluctuations. The readings suggest periodical energy surges. Captain Voss nodded to her Andromedan tactical officer, who immediately began the shield modifications. Is it worth investigating further, Commander? Shah's expression shifted to what the captain had come to recognize as his excited scientist look. Absolutely, Captain. Natural quantum fissures of this magnitude are extremely rare. The data we could gather would be invaluable for improving our own FTL technology, not to mention expanding our understanding of quantum physics. Very well, Captain Voss decided. Recommend an approach vector. As Shah returned to his console to calculate the safest approach, the tactical officer spoke up. Captain, I feel compelled to remind you that Commander Shah's last 3 scientific curiosities resulted in 2 emergency evacuations and 1 temporal displacement incident. Shah looked up with an expression of mild indignation. The temporal displacement was only 3 hours. Lieutenant Corral, and we learned a tremendous amount about chronoton particle behavior. We also all experienced our breakfast twice, Corral replied dryly. Captain Voss suppressed a smile. The friendly tension between her methodical Andromedan tactical officer and her enthusiastic human science officer had become a fixture of bridge dynamics. Your concern is noted, Lieutenant. We'll proceed with appropriate caution. Commander Shah, you have 1 hour for preliminary scans from a safe distance. After that, we'll reassess. Understood, Captain, Shah agreed, though she noticed he had already begun preparing more extensive scanning protocols than a preliminary examination would require. The bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency as the Horizon Seeker maneuvered to a position 5 million kilometers from the quantum fissure, close enough for detailed scans, but far enough to retreat if necessary. Fascinating, Shah murmured as data began flowing across his screens. The fissure appears to be connected to multiple points in space-time simultaneously. It's like a junction in the fabric of reality. Commander? Captain Voss prompted, recognizing the tone that often preceded an unorthodox suggestion. Shah looked up, barely containing his excitement. Captain, I believe we could send a probe through the fissure. The readings suggest multiple stable pathways. We might be able to gather data from several different regions of space simultaneously. Lieutenant Corral's skin shifted to a cautionary orange hue. The probe would likely be destroyed by the quantum forces within the fissure. Not necessarily, Shah countered. If we modify a Class 4 probe with additional shielding and quantum stabilizers, it should maintain integrity long enough to transmit significant data. Captain Voss considered the proposal. How long would these modifications take? 2 hours. Maybe 3. Shah estimated. Chief Engineer Taprax and I have been working on quantum-resistant materials for the stellar cartography probes. We could adapt those designs. The captain nodded slowly. Very well. Work with engineering to prepare a probe, but I want a complete risk assessment before launch. Yes, Captain, Shah replied, already heading for the turbolift. This is going to be incredible data, possibly revolutionary. As the science officer departed, Lieutenant Corral approached the captain's chair. Permission to speak freely, Captain? Always, Lieutenant. I've served with humans for 7 years now, and I still find their enthusiasm for potential disasters concerning... Captain Voss smiled slightly. It's not the disasters they're enthusiastic about, Corral. It's the discovery. Humans just seem to believe that the most valuable discoveries often lie adjacent to danger. An inefficient methodology, the Andromedan observed. Perhaps, the captain agreed, but occasionally remarkably effective. Maintain yellow alert status and continue monitoring the anomaly. I'll be in engineering. 3 hours later. The modified probe hovered at the launch position, its hull gleaming with additional reinforcement and specialized shielding. The bridge crew watched tensely as final preparations were completed. Probe telemetry online. Shaw reported from the science station. All systems nominal. Ready for launch on your command. Captain. Captain Voss nodded. Launch probe. The small craft accelerated toward the swirling quantum fissure, its sensors already transmitting data back to the Horizon Seeker. As it approached the edge of the phenomenon, energy patterns across its hull fluctuated wildly. Shields holding at 87%, Shaw narrated. Quantum stabilizers functioning within parameters. Approaching event horizon in 3, 2, 1. The probe crossed into the fissure and immediately disappeared from conventional sensors. Quantum tether maintaining connection, Shaw reported, his voice tense with excitement. Receiving telemetry. This is... Captain, you need to see this. He transferred the probe's visual feed to the main view screen. Instead of the chaotic energy patterns they expected, the screen showed what appeared to be normal space, but with unfamiliar star configurations. Where is it? Captain Voss asked. Unknown, Shaw admitted. Stellar cartography doesn't match any charted region, but the quantum signature suggests we're seeing another point in our universe, not an alternate dimension. As they watched, the visual feed suddenly shifted, showing a different star field. The probe is being pulled along multiple pathways, Shaw explained. It's passing through different regions of space in rapid succession. Some of these might be thousands of light years from our position. Lieutenant Corral studied the readings with newfound interest. If we could stabilize these pathways, this could revolutionize long-distance travel. Exactly, Shaw agreed enthusiastically. This isn't just a natural phenomenon. It's a network, a quantum highway system that might connect distant parts of the galaxy. The visual feed shifted again, this time showing not empty space, but a massive structure, clearly artificial and unlike any known design. Captain, Shaw began, but the feed abruptly cut out. Probe status, Captain Voss demanded. Quantum tether broken, Shaw reported, fingers flying over his console. Last readings show massive energy surge. The probe was likely destroyed. Or captured, Corral suggested quietly. A tense silence fell over the bridge as the implications settled in. Record all data, Captain Voss ordered. Encrypt the findings under Security Protocol Alpha. Lieutenant Corral, maintain defensive posture and continuous scans of the anomaly. Commander Shaw, I want a complete analysis of everything we received before the probe was lost. Yes, Captain, Shaw acknowledged, already deeply engaged with the incoming data. But may I suggest one thing first? Go ahead, Commander. We should move the ship. Now. His voice had lost all its previous excitement, replaced by urgent concern. The quantum fissure is exhibiting increasing instability patterns, consistent with pre-collapse behavior. Helm, back us off, half impulse, Captain Voss ordered immediately. As the Horizon Seeker retreated to a safer distance, the quantum fissure began to pulse more rapidly, its colors shifting toward the violet end of the spectrum. Energy levels rising exponentially, Shaw reported. I believe our probe may have triggered some kind of response. Before anyone could respond, the fissure suddenly contracted to a pinpoint of intense light, then expanded outward in a shock wave of quantum energy. Brace for impact, Captain Voss shouted. The wave hit the ship with tremendous force, sending crew members lurching against their stations despite inertial dampeners. Systems flickered across the bridge as power fluctuated. When the chaos subsided, the view screen showed only empty space where the anomaly had been. Damage report, Captain Voss requested, straightening in her chair. Minor damage to outer hull plating, Corral reported. No casualties. All critical systems functional. The fissure is completely gone, Shaw added, sounding equal parts disappointed and intrigued. But we did receive a massive data packet in the final moments before it collapsed. It's encrypted, I think, or at least in a format our systems don't recognize. Captain Voss considered this development carefully. It seems our probe may have attracted someone's attention, or something's attention. The artificial structure, Corral noted. It appeared to be a station or outpost of some kind. But unlike any design in Alliance records, Shaw confirmed. Captain, this could be evidence of a previously unknown spacefaring civilization. Or an ancient one, the captain suggested. That fissure had been stable for potentially thousands of years until our probe disturbed it. She stood, surveying her bridge crew. Transmit all data to Alliance headquarters with priority encryption. Include my recommendation for a full exploration mission with appropriate security measures. As the officers carried out her orders, Captain Voss moved to stand beside Commander Shaw, who was still analyzing the cryptic data packet. Any progress? She asked quietly. It's unlike anything I've ever seen, he admitted. But there are patterns, mathematical constants that might serve as a translation key. With time. You'll have it, she assured him. But Commander? Yes, Captain? Next time you discover an unprecedented cosmic phenomenon, perhaps we could start with passive observation before sending in probes. Shaw had the good grace to look slightly abashed. Where's the fun in that, Captain? Despite herself, Captain Voss smiled. The human's irrepressible curiosity was precisely why she'd requested him for her science officer. In the complex, often dangerous business of exploring uncharted space, caution was essential, but so was the willingness to reach into the unknown. Set course for the nearest starbase, she ordered. We have a report to file that I suspect will keep the xenoarchaeologists busy for years. As the Horizon Seeker engaged its engines, the empty space behind them remained unperturbed. But somewhere, perhaps thousands of light-years away, someone, or something, was now aware of their presence. Discovery, as humans so often demonstrated, was rarely without consequences. In the vast expanse of the galaxy, the stories of human unpredictability continued to spread. From research stations to diplomatic corps, from medical bays to engineering decks, the species that had once been confined to a single blue planet kept finding new ways to simultaneously terrify and impress their alien counterparts. Alliance training manuals grew increasingly specific about human verbal cues that preceded chaos. Diplomatic protocols evolved to accommodate what one Venusian ambassador called the refreshing chaos of human innovation. Medical procedures incorporated the strange human willingness to try solutions that probably won't make things worse. And throughout it all, humans remained blissfully unaware of just how alarming their casual approach to the impossible could be. Because that was the thing about humans. They didn't know they weren't supposed to be able to do the things they did. They hadn't gotten the memo that certain problems were unsolvable, certain risks unacceptable, certain ideas too outlandish to voice in polite company. They just kept trying things, saying, "Hold my beer," and "Don't worry about it," and "I wonder what happens if..." And somehow, against all reasonable probability, it worked out often enough to justify their continued approach to a universe that was, by any reasonable measure, far too dangerous to treat with such casual curiosity. Which was why, despite all the warnings and orientation sessions and careful monitoring, the Alliance kept them around. Because sometimes, when facing the truly impossible, you needed a species crazy enough to try anyway.